Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting on Monday, October 7th. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Camargo? Commissioner Chan?
Present.
President Yao?
Present.
Commissioner Jemian? Commissioner Hale?
Next item, please.
2 consent items. A, approval of the September 19th, 2013 special meeting minutes.
Since I think we have 2 commissions missing, I'd like to move that agenda item to the next meeting so we can have additional approval of that. Is that okay with my fellow commissioners?
Sure.
Okay, so let's move that 2A item to the next meeting for approval of the meeting minutes for next meeting. So before we move on to the next item, I'd like to make the next item as oral communication and open up for staff comments at this point. And then I'll open up for additional oral communication for those in the audience who might come in later so that they can provide additional speaking time. So at this point, let's do oral communications for staff announcements.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of Commission, hello, my name is Atine Hartunian. I'm the Public Benefits Coordinator. I'd just like to take this time to invite the commissioners and the public to our Utility Day. Right before you could see the flyer for Utility Day. It will be on Thursday, October 24th. That's when we are opening up our Utility Operations Center to the public, and we invite all members of the community to join us. Where we'll be offering 2 tours of our power plant, one at 1 p.m., one at 3 p.m. There will be other booths and demonstrations for the public to participate in. We'll have free food and refreshments while it lasts. And our customers and visitors will learn about our electric and water departments. Again, it's open to all members of the public. Before the noon entrance that's available to the public, we will be inviting Glendale Unified School District students to this event and give them private demonstrations and tours of our facility. And it's an RSVP only event, and we at this point have 340 students, 4th and 5th graders, joining us from 3 different schools that have RSVP'd. So it's our way of kind of sharing with the community what we do and how we provide reliable service, and we invite you to join us on that day.
Great, thank you. Can I ask, is this a yearly event, and why is it on a weekday instead of a weekend?
Okay. It used to be on the day of Public Power Week, which is actually this week. We are going to make it an annual event, but it's going to be a joint electric and water event, so it's a utility day event. Our power plant did go through some construction phase and changes and security changes, so we did put the event on hold. We had other events a few years back, similar to an Energy Expo, but this year we decided to bring it back to the Utility Operations Center and slowly start making this an annual event where we have more space. So this year we have pretty good space to do it, but each year as we do this event, we're going to make it bigger and better. So.
Okay.
You mentioned you want people to RSVP, right?
They don't have to RSVP, but for those that are interested in the tour, if they really want to be a part of the tour because spaces are limited, we ask that you RSVP for the tour, and we are taking down names.
Okay, great, thanks.
So you mentioned that it couldn't be on a weekend because of space limitation?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I didn't answer that part. On a weekend, it's a little bit more difficult for staff and staff time in terms of overtime and having staff availability on weekends. And also, if there's any safety concerns for having too many people on a weekend, I'll leave that up to Ramon if there are any concerns about that. But at this point, we are getting a good turnout on weekdays too. So, and then we also have more committed staff on that day.
Okay.
For the most part, since we want to open this up for students so that they can participate, we want to do it on a school day. It's more of a school day need as opposed to being a work day need.
Right, sounds like it. Okay, it's a good event. Well, thank you for the announcement, Ms.
Hope you can make it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go back to item 3. Item 3, please.
3 reports and information. A, electric outage indices report. Ramona Boyd.
Mr. Bray.
I think I'll just stay here. So,
Okay.
We haven't provided you an outage report for a while, but we do on a written basis, but we haven't come up to you and explained what's going on with our indices. So we thought that it's a good time to give you an update, and especially since we had a big event back on September 18th, just to give you an explanation what happened, and we believe you may be looking for that. And the event I'm talking about is on September 18th, about 8 a.m., is we lost about 3 substations that day because of an event that happened at our Glendale substation, what we call the Glendale rack. And as a result, we lost 3 substations, and that affected about 13,500 customers. And let me show you what happened on that day. And basically, what you see here is we have what's called a link. It's a mechanical link that holds the switches when we open or close it. And what happened to this link right at this point is it broke. And this is a metal part, and this part is connected to the ground. And when it fell on the what we call the buses, which is the live parts of the substation rack. So we have a northeast bus and a southwest bus. In the process, it created a short circuit, and our protection system did what it's supposed to do. It took it out. As a result, this is our 34 kV bus, and all our 34 kV substation, which is Grandview, Fremont, and Howard. That's how they're getting their feed from. And so as a result, what we call the differential relay trips it out and say, you have a problem, we're going to make it safe. So and that's what happened there. And that resulted in this area here being fed from those substations to be affected. See the highlighted areas, and that's where the roughly 13,500 customers were residing or have businesses at. So we got plenty of phone calls that day, but we isolated it, and it's a matter of time just switching everything back. And what we did is that we isolated the problem. We actually took the switch rack out of service, and we fed the other substations from different locations. Okay.
Before you move on, I have a question. That part that broke, how old was that part?
That part was probably at least 40 years old. So what we're doing right now is we're doing an analysis, is what could we have done to have prevented it, should we have caught the fracture or the problem with that.
And do you know the replacement schedule for that
It's
part?
already been repaired and replaced. What we did was we went to our welding shop and manufactured the piece that we needed.
I mean, after the accident you're talking about, like before, what should have been the replacement schedule for that part?
We normally replace that part because it's a mechanical part, and then it's just a matter of how can we have inspected that better. And we took a look at what we call, in fact, every year we do what we call the heat trace, where we do an analysis using the heat trace, and that's really a part that will not be caught if it's stressed, because it's not part of the circuit. And we exercise the switch normally on a twice-a-year basis. We're not sure we've caught it. We're still finishing up the engineering analysis for what we call the root cause. Once we have that, we'll share that with you, what the engineers and the field guys are finding. So I don't know if you can recall, that's one of the things that we are getting better in doing, is doing a root cause analysis. So we're not fixing symptoms, but we're actually making the problem go away.
So is that to say then that you have your approach is to try to identify problems before failure, or is it more that you have a run to failure strategy?
Neither. We try not to run it to failure to a certain extent, that if we, through the root cause analysis, we can identify similar parts that could fail the same way, we would do preventative measures and replace those parts in advance. What we're trying to do with the root cause analysis is to prevent the same thing from happening again.
All right, thank you.
And then we have 2 other outages, not as significant, but also pretty big deal, is on September 20th at about 10 p.m. We lost about 3,000 customers, albeit it's only 6 minutes. but we had a cable that failed, and that cable was replaced. And here, if you're wondering why the outage took only 6 minutes, this is one of those circuits where we have what we call a recloser circuit. Once basically the fault has been isolated, we reclose it, and we're good. We can start the repair. And September 26th, at about 8:58 a.m., early in the morning, we had a windy day, and one of the trees made contact with one of the lines that caused the outage. This is one of the circuits that we have not updated. Remember the presentations we made about the refusing the circuits? This is one of the circuits that we have not replaced. Had we done that, we probably would have isolated a small area as opposed to the whole feeder. Okay. So in your package, I have all the definitions again, but so what you have are the different indices, and the way we're defining it, just to reiterate what we do, is that interruption is basically when we lose power for more than a minute. It's what we call an interruption. I'm sorry. Anything, the industry standards, anything that's a minute and above is called an interruption. 5 minutes and higher is an outage. But what we do here, anything above a minute, we just consider that an outage. So we're not differentiating between the two. So the indices that you would see basically reflect anything that's more than 1 minute and calling that an outage. We don't track the planned outage, as we reported before, because it's something that we need to take the circuit out for either repair or maintenance. And so here's the indices. Again, if this is a 12-month rolling average, we have SAFE, which is the System Average Interruption Frequency Index. Right now, we are at 1.06. Our goal is to be at under 1 or under. And what this means for this index is if you have a business or resident of Glendale in the course of a 12-month period, you can expect an outage of at least 1 per year, per 12 months. SAIDI, on the other hand, is the System Average Interruption Duration Index, which means that if you are experiencing an outage, or if you experience an outage, you can expect that your power will be out for at least 40 minutes. Our goal is to reduce that to as low as we can. So our CAIDI is if you do experience the outage yourself, you will experience, and that's the actual experience that the customers have. It's about 36 minutes. So to put that in perspective, this is the last 12 months performance. We used to give you a 5-year review, just tracking everything, but now I think we're fine-tuning it. Our goal is 1, and this looks a lot worse than it is. If you look at the scale, we're looking at tenths of a minute here. Instead of having, or not a minute, but tenths in terms of with reference to 1, so 1.05, 1.1. That's our goal is 1. And the trend is still coming down, but we've had periods when we've exceeded that 1.0, depending on the number of customers that get affected. In fact, the outage that we had, that I showed that happened on September 18th, is what's causing this index to rise up, because we have about a lot of customers affected. Okay? And then the SAIDI, as you can see here, at one point, we started going above that, about 40 minutes. We approached 50, but we're recovering again and getting back to where we needed to be. Same thing with SAFE. Those are the 3 indices that we track, that we report to you every month on how we're performing. And with that, are there any questions?
Your SAFE?
Yes.
I know we talked about this earlier, about the replacement schedule and how you can prevent it, avoid it. And so besides what you discussed about doing, is there anything else that you're doing to try and get that SAFE below your goal?
Yep. Part of the modernization project that we're working on is to put a lot more devices out in the field.
What kind of devices?
The smart devices that we're putting in, some of or intelligent devices, reclosing, the refusing. So once we get those programs up and running again, we believe that we can keep this down lower than what it is now.
What kind of time frame are we looking at? When will we get those devices out?
Well, the devices, every time we upgrade, When we touch them, the devices are installed in place. The only thing we don't have is the smart to bring the information back. And one of the programs that we're doing through the DOE grant is to do the pilot program to do the distribution automation outage management system, and that is going to be in place in 18 months, Craig? So we're doing the installation now. The hardware's in place, but the smarts are still not operational.
As part of the smart grid,
The modernization project,
the modernization part?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So in about 18 months? we
About
will have that
18
in
months.
place? Okay.
to get that pilot going. But for the most part, every time we touch the circuit, we upgrade it. The only information, the only thing that doesn't happen is we don't have the information coming back to us. We have to go out in the field still.
Okay, and it'll be 18 months when that situation will improve dramatically. Okay.
Right.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, one other question. So thank you for this data, very helpful in terms of tracking our performance. So my question for you is it our practice to compare ourselves to our relative performance, or is this an area in which we have or can look at other industry benchmarks? That is, compare ourselves relative to the performance of other utilities.
We do. We benchmark ourselves against the other POUs or public utilities as part of SCAPA benchmarking. We also benchmark ourselves against Edison, PG&E, and San Diego, or SEMPRA.
So it would be helpful then to see that relative performance versus our target. So if our target is one incident in 40 minutes, what do the other benchmarks look like?
Correct. And we normally do that once a year. We just haven't done that this year. And I plan to submit that to you in either January or February so we can look at a whole calendar year for comparison. We also participate in a national benchmark, the American Public Power Association. Mm-hmm. And we do compare ourselves with best practices that's out there. And we will bring back to you one of these days.
So would you rather hold until that time, that is January, February, when you have the actual data, or do you have an indication as to how we do relative to others?
We're doing much better than the IOUs. I can guarantee you that. When we're doing, I think, towards the middle, if not better, than the neighboring utilities. So.
Okay.
And we can bring you those data as to and I'd rather have the graphs and the facts as opposed to mentioning it by memory.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bragg, I just have a question about the mechanical piece that failed. As Commissioner Chan mentioned, is it typical of one of those failure rates of that piece, or is it something that, as Commissioner Carmichael indicated, is it run to failure, or is it something that you can do preventive maintenance on?
That's what we're looking at, is could we have prevented it? We don't know, because this is a one piece that normally doesn't fail. Whether there was a stress fracture that we should have caught, how we should have caught that, that's what we're trying to determine.
Okay. And then industry-wise, this is not a typical failure piece either?
No, it is not.
Okay. Well, we have a speaker for this item, so Mr. Herbert Milano, please, for item 3A.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Herbert Milano. As I was one of the customers impacted by the 90-minute power outage on the 26th of September, and I had a couple of questions with regard to, and a couple of comments with regard to what I have seen as far as the electrical utility responsiveness towards these outages. I think that their approach has been commendable. Continually during the years, I have seen Mr. Abuek has said, this was the problem, this is what we need to do about it, this is the plan, and then the execution. And I think to that extent, I wish that all city departments worked in the same light. Identifying the problem, owning up to what the problem is, figuring out what needs to be done in the future, and what capital improvements need. And that's where you come in. Because we need to know whether the capital improvements and the funding necessary for that is being maintained. My experience with city governance, and that's, I'm telling you, from hundreds and hundreds of presentations that I've made, and I don't know how many umpteen hours that I sat before the city council. is that infrastructure is the part that gets put behind. You know, the salaries and the perks and the pensions and everything else gets the priority, but it is the infrastructure, whether it's locally, in the city level, county level, state level, federal level, is the infrastructure that gets shortchanged. And one of the ways that we address it is by creating a proper strategic plan. So what surprised me from the last meeting that I attended was that when Commissioner Chan asked the question, where is the strategic plan? They said, well, it went away along with our prior director. I think strategic plans should have a certain continuity. You don't just drop it because the director left. And so my thinking is that issues about the long-term objectives need your continual oversight. And so I have the following questions. What is the core state of the infrastructure of electrical, so that we can get it in a summarized form so that we know where the utility really needs to be in terms of its proper funding? I've taken a look. I was in Seattle visiting my son, and I pay attention to things like how they maintain their power and the power lines and so forth. But I never saw in Seattle the number of freight power lines that I see here in Glendale. At least I didn't see it over there. And so I wonder, what is the real status of what we need to change as far as the overhead lines? What is the impact of our continual tree trimming, and what is the cost over the long haul, let's say the next 20 years of tree trimming, versus putting continually some type of investment into undergrounding a lot of the main power lines that is going to impact a significant number of customers. What is our risk with regard to high wind, and really extreme weather conditions on the type of infrastructure that we have? And I think that those are the questions that I'm hoping to hear some answers in the future with regard to how we're moving along towards that. Because it is my opinion that so long as we continue to move money away from the Glendale Water and Power to the general fund, we're going to continue to shortchange our infrastructure, which means that our quality of life will be impacted, and the business reliability on that power is going to be impacted. And I'd also like to know what is the potential impact of the significant number of new residences that have been built in Glendale, and what is the impact on the infrastructure as a whole? What's the capital investment needed to be able to maintain it? And what will be the cost given the additional requirements that we'll have to meet the renewable energy requirements? So I think that all of these things are part of your overall strategic plan, and it was my hope that you have a monthly review of some key factor of that strategic plan continually, so that at least you're able to communicate to the public where we are and where we're headed. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Milano. Any comments or questions additional for Mr. Bray? If not, thank you, Mr. Bray. Just want to, for the record, to mention that Commissioner Carmichael joined us before item 3 on doing reports, so we can move on to item 3B, please.
Before we move on, I'm sorry, I do have a question. With the additional buildings, the residential buildings that are coming in, Mr. Herbert Milano made a good point. Were there studies done as to the increase in population that we're anticipating in Glendale? Do we have the capacity to serve? Was that study done? I'm just curious.
Yeah, every year we produce a 5-year capital improvement program. In that improvement program, we identify the customers that we think are coming in, what type of load they would introduce into the system, and how we're going to serve them, and how we're going to back up the service for reliability. We do look at that on a regular basis. For the most part, the new customers that came in, most of them are replacement loads. We lost a significant amount of loads during the recession. And if you are following our peak and our sales, we're not up to the 2005-2006 level yet. We're still below that.
And like these new buildings that are coming in on Central, Orange, and left and right, with all that coming in, you're confident that that was already included in the forecast?
It is included. Like I said, it's in our 5-year planning.
Okay.
Once we get a hold, we have a regular meeting with our planners to find out which customers are coming online and by when. We try to schedule that. And so when we do our planning and what infrastructure we need to do, we try to do what I call touch it once, so we don't just extend it for that customer. Any other improvements we need to make to tie other feeders or substations together, we do that all at the same time.
Okay. And is it true that all new circuits and feeders coming in are underground?
No,
No?
not necessarily. It depends on where it is. But for the downtown, most of them are underground, but there's certain areas that we stay overhead.
Still overhead.
Yeah, still overhead.
And that's for economic reasons?
That's correct. That's mainly the main part. And in some areas, there's just no room to underground. One example, there's one project in downtown where it requires that the alley be vacated so we can do the undergrounding. So there's a lot of factors.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bragg. So item 3B, please.
3B, Chromium 6 MCL update, Ramona Bueg.
Yeah, last time we met, we presented to you what the status was on the Chrome 6, and what was requested by the commission is that we come to you before we do the presentation to the council so you can make a recommendation. What happened was we did not, or we are not doing a presentation to council. There was an email that Mr. Zern sent you last Friday, I believe, explaining the position that we're taking. And what we did was through Mr. Ochoa's office, the city submitted a comment to California Department of Public Health stating that the 10 parts per billion that they selected for the draft MCL, it's good, and we applaud them for using the science and the results of the study that we did, but we say that it's a good number. However, we want to produce water that better serves our citizens, and that's staying at 5 parts per billion. So that summarizes that's what's in that letter. And if there's any other comments that we can take. So bottom line is the 10 is the standard, but we will deliver at 5.
So this is the only comment that we provided to the California Department of Health? There's no additional comment, but just this letter?
With respect to the draft MCL, that's correct, but staff is preparing some technical comments that we're submitting to them by December 11th with respect to how this is going to be implemented. There's some technical changes in the regulation that they change up to including monitoring at the distribution level. We want to know how they're going to implement that and how we're going to measure it. So we're submitting more clarifications than it is comments. And there is a hearing on Friday at 9 a.m. at MWD that we will be participating in, and we'll see what the rest of the industry is saying about the draft limit.
So were there any comments from the City Council, and what was their feedback on this recommendation?
Yeah, this is the only feedback that I have, President Dow.
So it was presented to the City Council, and they were okay with having this letter go to California Department of Public Health to stipulate that we would like to keep our level at 5 ppb.
Right. This decision was administratively decided over 10 years ago, and the fact that we're able to meet a better standard was the decision is let's continue delivering the better quality water.
So personally, I do agree with that assessment, so I just want to clarify what the process was and how, if there were discussions among the City Council members to keep the level, or was it a decision that because the City Council had prior made that decision that the City Manager's Office was able to draft this letter and submit it because of that?
Yeah, I believe this was the direction that we were given by the City Council.
I think this is great. Yeah, when I read it, I thought, oh, that's great. It just continues to show that we, continue to go beyond, beyond and above, the absolute minimum, and it just shows, that continues our effort and image. So, congratulations. That's great.
And you had a question last month about what do we do with the difference if we do go with 10. There was a $325,000. I forgot that that's really part of the water adjustment cost that we charge. So if we don't have to blend that much more, that's something that we just don't pass through. So it's not. So it's a pass-through cost. So.
Any other comments or questions about the item? Well, thank you, Mr. Bragg. Let's move on to the next item then.
3C, Renewable Portfolio Standards, update, Stephen Lenz.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Steve Lenz, Chief Assistant General Manager for Glendale Water and Power. Last week, we filed our official power content label with the state, and in light of that, today we wanted to give you a quick update on our renewable energy procurement as it relates to the rest of our system. Now, I think all of you have seen this pie chart before. This is a chart that shows our energy procurement for calendar year 2012. The difference between this chart and the chart that you've seen before is that these are the final numbers, official numbers for calendar year 2012. And most importantly, the green pie slice up here is renewable energy for calendar year 2012. That comes in at about 18.8%. Next to that in yellow is our coal, which is down to about 23%. And typically, that number is closer to 30%, but we had a major outage at our San Juan plant during calendar 12, so that number's down significantly. You can see that our gas is around 30%, our purchases around 13.5%, and I always like to point out that our large hydro here is a little over 5%, and before the state mandated 33% by 2020, and the city had its own renewable energy plan, we used to count that 5% towards our renewable energy requirement. So now we've got the 18.8, and in addition, we've got another 5.4% of emission-free energy that we're bringing in through large hydroelectric power at Hoover.
Mr. Lenz,
Yeah.
can you clarify what the purchases are? Are they part of gas, or should that be part of the power?
They're market purchases. They're purchases from the market.
There's no
So that's
source that you can
energy
tie
purchases
back?
from the ISO. They're just bilateral purchases of generic brown power or market power that may or may not have RECs and carbon bundled with it. But it's just market purchases.
So we can't isolate where that power is generated from, whether coal or natural gas or nuclear? There's no
No, it's just
designation?
market. No, it's not traced back to a source unless it's bundled. Some of those purchases are in fact bundled with RECs, and I mean everything we buy, there's a tag that schedules, and we take delivery from where it is, but we don't track where just general purchases come from.
So, but we know for
They
sure.
come from the market, which includes hydro, gas, coal, all sorts of.
So potentially you could say possibly that it's not part of the renewable then, because we can't claim that. And then can we possibly say that that's not coming from coal either? Or the purchases?
I don't think we can say that it's not coming from coal, because I'm pretty sure that some of the market power is coming from coal sources.
Okay. Well, it's just interesting to me that we can't isolate that we say we want to buy power from a source, so that if we're going to pay more for solar to capture the RPS goal versus paying for natural gas, which might be cheaper. So it sounds like we can't really identify that.
Well, our purchases of specific renewable energy are included in the 18.8%. Of bundled renewable energy are included in that.
But I thought part of this pie chart is to identify the energy source, but if you just put purchases, there's no way to tie that back into
Well,
the energy
let me go to the next chart, which shows you our detailed information from our 2012 power content label. This breaks down our resources by project. You can see from the first three projects there are wind. They're a little over 8%. We've got a little over 1% of geothermal. Grayson landfill gas is close to 7%. That's biogas. That's renewable. We've got some small hydro, about 2.6%. Solar is only 0.01%, and that's the Glendale City College project. But once again, when you get to the bottom here, we have miscellaneous power purchases. They basically, the source is unspecified. It's market power. And that's about 13%.
So, I mean, it's legally reportable, so that's how we report it, and it's acceptable. Is that how it is? Okay.
That's how we report market purchases, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned that we were always able to include the large hydro before.
Yes.
For the next couple of milestone, 2020, where we need to 33%, and then there's one before that, and might have been 2015, I'm not sure. But these two milestones, are we going to be able to continue to include the large hydro?
No, and we're not including it now. So this page here shows you the compliance period. So down here, it's not easy to read, but compliance period 1 is calendar year 2011, 2012, and 2013. Compliance period 2 is 14 through 16. Compliance period 3 is 17 through 20. You can't count large hydro for any of these compliance periods.
Okay.
We do not count large hydro anymore. For compliance period 1, those 3 years, we have to average 20% of our system as renewable energy. And while calendar year 12 was 18.8%, we are right on track to have an average of 20%. And as a matter of fact, on the final page here, our goals are to meet that compliance mandate at minimum cost, but also to over-procure a bit in 2013 so that we have a cushion, because the load at the end of the year is a moving target, and you don't know exactly what your load is until December 31st at midnight. So we are going to be buying about 10% more than we need in terms of credits, and that will just roll forward or be banked for future compliance periods.
So what's the amount we need for 2013 to get our average to 20?
Okay, so back to this chart. The blue line is our forecasted load over all of these years. The red line is the percent of renewables that we need in any given year. And so you can see here for compliance period 1, all of that, it's about 20%. You can see on the bottom here the megawatt hours approximately that we need every year to reach that goal. And it's around 200,000 megawatt hours for each of those 3 years to meet the compliance requirement. And we're basically right at that level now. And we're going to be, towards the end of the year, purchasing a little bit of short-term renewable energy credits in the market to make sure that we have a little bit of a buffer so that we are in compliance at the end of the year when the final numbers come in. But that's all I have, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
So it's just the way the law is written for RPS 33 that we're not allowed to capture the hydro.
Correct. You're not allowed to count large hydro. You can count smaller hydro, which is below 20 or 30 megawatts. I think it's 30, and that's why we're allowed to count Tieton, which is on here. It's a small project we have up in Washington that we share with Burbank. That's a 20 megawatt small hydro project, and that is considered renewable under the law.
Yeah. And then also, by extension, some would, I could argue that nuclear is a zero-emission source of electricity, but that, too, I suppose, is not covered by the legislation.
That's correct.
Do we, for reporting purposes, so there's compliance is one thing, and we need to be compliant with the law by for the standard. Do we have other forms of reporting where we do capture hydro and/or other forms of zero emission in order to help people understand what we're doing as a city in order to produce clean electricity?
We do capture it here in the power content label annually. We don't set out a separate number that says total of emission-free energy, but you can see here Palo Verde Nuclear is about 7.5%, as you mentioned. That is emission-free. And Hoover here is about, an additional 5%. So you've got an additional, 12% or so there of, carbon-free energy, but we don't go to the extent of reporting it as a number that is carbon-free is that additional 12%, primarily because the law doesn't allow us to count that towards the renewable portfolio standard
Right.
mandate.
Okay.
Well, it's been displayed quite graphically, and so people do see that there's other sources that are emissions-free. But I was wondering, Mr. Lintz, if you can show on that slide there, slide 3, another column that shows potentially a cost associated with each of these power content mix. Let's say high winds in the first one. What is the cost for that 1.92% share? Can you display those type of breakdown between the cost of each of these different power sources?
Sure, we can probably do that. Probably in terms that are most understandable to the public would be, cents per kilowatt hour, I presume. So, sure, next time we come back, we can add a column so that you can kind of get a sense of the relative cost of the different
Right.
types of resources.
Right, and potentially the bottom where you make purchase power, if it's unspecified, if it's really a low cost, then it's something that we should consider more. If that's even cheaper than, say, natural gas, for example, then we can suggest potentially look at optimizing that mix if possible.
Well, and we optimize it now. I mean, there's a cost difference between buying power on the market versus buying gas and generating your own energy using your available units. And every day our traders optimize that spark spread, as it's called. So that purchased power number there is an optimized, most economic dispatch cost.
So do you know if in the future the regulators might want to specify what the purchase powers are before we get, potentially that could be either clean power or dirty power, so we don't know. I mean, would that be specified in your opinion in the future to break that out?
Well, they have carbon amounts that they assign to unspecified power and power that's comes in from out of state, and I can go into more detail on that in another more detailed report about market power and how it's characterized. But we're working within the way they want us to label those energies now.
But if you had a choice to re-specify the purchase power, would you want to specify where they came from? Is that optimal? I mean, can we do it even though we're not asked to do it? Can we do it internally to see where those purchase powers came from?
Do you mean
Like whether they came
from California or from the state or from the type of resource? I guess I'm not clear on your question.
Yeah, I mean, the 13.5%, isn't there a way for us to internally evaluate where we buy our power so that we don't, even though we don't have to report it, but can we internally look at the type of power that you're buying?
I mean, we can. We have data on every transaction that we do. There's a large number of transactions. They come from all over the WEC, which is the Western United States, and there are various sources of market power in the ISO, outside of the ISO. I guess the question is, I'm just trying to understand what you might want us to use that for.
It would be a good thing if we can say that those purchase powers are more renewable, but my concern is that we can, potentially those purchases might be lumped into coal power because we don't know. We can't really specify where they came from. So my concern maybe is misleading to say that purchases is 13%, but if you have even half of that goes into coal, then that bumps up the number. But we know for sure that you can't really claim that for RPS, so it's not renewable.
Well, I mean, there, as I mentioned, I can come back with the numbers. That market power, unspecified, is actually a term of art that carries with it a carbon content of so many tons per megawatt hour.
Right.
And that tells you what the emissions factor is for that. And when we buy that unspecified power, we have to go out and cover our carbon requirements for that. So you'll go out and you'll buy carbon allowances on top of that power to make sure that you're bringing your carbon down to 1990 levels by 2020
Right.
like we're required.
So would you assume a mix of percentage coal in that purchases versus a percentage of gas? Because it seems like you know what the carbon content of that purchase power is. So what would you know what percentage of that percentage purchases would be?
I don't know, but it's a mix of system resources, and it's given a certain amount of carbon that's associated with that market mix. It's a mix of all sorts of things.
Okay. So if you do have
Mr.
that,
Hale, you wanted to clarify?
do you have some?
Yeah, I actually had a clarifying question. I mean, are these mostly spot purchases when, hey, we need a megawatt and we don't really care where it comes from because we just need to serve load? Is that
Yes.
mostly what those are?
Yes, they're mostly real-time spot purchases.
Okay, so I guess for my purposes, what I'd like to see is just the cumulative over the course of the year carbon profile of that power. so that we get a sense of how dirty it is and when it's most dirty, and sort of map it over the course of the year or the time of day even for when we make the spot purchases. I don't know how complicated it is to compile that data, but I think that gets at what President Yao is looking for, if I'm not mistaken.
You know, we're tracking all of our carbon. We've got a certain amount of tons per year,
Right.
and we've got to cover that with carbon allowances. So that the carbon content of those market purchases is tracked.
Okay.
We can come back and show that to you another time if you like.
Sure.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could do that to maybe move all those purchases into one of those other pie slices, if possible. You don't think it's possible?
I'm not sure if that's possible, but we'll go back and talk about it.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I really appreciated your point, President Yao, on the matter of cost. So I do think that it would be, so I'd echo that, would love to see the cost associated with each of these slices of the pie. I do think that for policymakers and for our customers, it's good to understand the price of these things. So that is to say, some folks might lead you to believe that renewable sources like wind and solar are inexpensive because the sun is free and the wind is free, right? But in fact, typically they're among the highest priced, which is I think that as a society we need a good strong mix, and as customers and policymakers we just need to understand the balance, right? So the higher we move the number. In terms of if there are thoughts of moving the renewable portfolio standard above 33%, that there's a price that goes along with that. So I think to the extent that we can help tell that story, what are the costs? And maybe, as you say, it's about kilowatt hour. But however we tell that story, I do think that when we put forth these types of numbers, that price is an important part of that story.
Understood. And maybe we can bring it to you in terms of percent of your bill that is renewable. We have those numbers as well.
I have a question. Back to the RPS. The strategy that you described earlier, how we're going to be able to meet every milestone. The cost has already been included, right, in our last rate proposal. We had a 5-year rate increase. All the costs that you anticipate in meeting these milestones were already included,
yes.
Correct?
So we have a forecast for how we're going to meet that 33%, and actually we have a forecast for this line here in the middle, which is we have to be at this level through 2015, steps up.
That's right.
This exact line, or at least for the next 5 years. There's a forecast of that and a forecast of the cost of that included in the pro forma budget. That's the basis of the 5-year rate plan. Yes.
Right, yeah, I figure that. I just want to make sure, confirm that. Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, I've just got one more question on RPS compliance. If memory serves, the Energy Commission is who we report to in terms of our power content label and what our progress is at meeting the RPS objectives. And then they refer that finding they make a finding of whether we're in compliance or not and refer that finding to Air Resources Board, right?
Correct.
So have they come up with a methodology for what the proposed fines will be, or whether there will be fines or anything like that yet?
I'll defer to council for a moment, and then we can.
Commissioner Hale, there's a rulemaking proceeding ongoing right now looking at how those penalties are going to be assessed and what the structure is, and we're actively monitoring that. But at this time, they're still looking at what they're going to do. So.
Okay.
Oh, just one last thing, Mr. Lin. This is something that I read about. Is there a greenhouse gas dividend that we would give back to the community or ratepayers? Is that something that Glendale Water and Power have or participates in? Something about a greenhouse gas dividend? Does the city receive that?
We're not receiving that. I think that's in connection with the low carbon fuel standard. But we, at this time, haven't put that structure in place. I can get some more information about that and bring it back to you.
So it's something that the city potentially could be participating in one way or another in terms of low carbon emissions dividend.
Yeah, in my understanding, it has to do with the low carbon fuel standard. You have to put a structure in place, and then you kind of collect these credits through. It's a fuel-related carbon capture that once you collect those, you can then give it back to the customers in terms of a dividend. But I don't know more detail than that at this point.
Yeah, if you can find out how it relates to the city customers and how the ratepayers can benefit, that'll be a good thing to pursue.
Will do.
Thank you, Mr. Lins. Great, that's it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next item, please.
3D, O-Power application update. Craig Keenan.
Mr. President, Commissioners, I'm Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator at GWP. Here to give you an update on the O-Power program. I believe you asked about it at the last Commission meeting. Basically, my presentation will cover these three items: the latest program results, a look at how our program compares to other O-Power programs, and a brief discussion of what we have in planned over the next 6 months. Before I get into the numbers, I'd like to give you just some background on our program. Basically, we were one of the early adopters of O-Power. We started our program in the middle of 2009. It was shortly after SMUD had done a pilot program, and it was featured in the New York Times, and they came to SCAPA, gave us a presentation, and we started the program then. In 2009, we started the program with 25,000 customers, and 10,000 in a control group. And then after we put our digital meters out, we expanded the program to 50,000 customers, and we also opened the web site up to all our 70,000 residential customers. In 2012, this program saved our residential customers 5.8 million kilowatt hours, and then in the last fiscal year, that number reached just over 6 million kilowatt hours. So it really saves customers a lot of money. It's, as you'll see, the legacy group averages about 3% a year, so 3% on 25,000 residential customers is a pretty sizable energy savings. The expansion group it's only been in place for, like I said, a couple of years. And usually it ramps up and you get more savings the longer the program is in place. It's been averaging about, I think it's about 2.6%, I believe, in the last year. So if you look in terms of energy savings since the program began in summer, is when we started, summer 2009, we started getting results, and later that fall, savings were about 17.3 gigawatt hours, about $3.1 million savings on customer bills. That's, I think, a pretty good result for this program. The way the program works, there's 6 home energy reports a year mailed to the 50,000 customers. And then if customers don't want to receive the report for any reason, they can opt out. And our opt-out rate has been really low. You look at the combined legacy group versus the expansion, it's less than 1%. So most people, they appreciate the program. How do we compare to the broader O-Power portfolio? Our legacy group, or the original 25,000, outperforms pretty much all O-Power programs. And they have programs across the country and overseas.
Do you have a sample of one of these home energy reports?
I don't have one with me, but I can get you one. As far as the expansion group, it's not doing as well as the legacy group, but then again, it's not been around as long. We hope to see the numbers go up a little more, but it's still doing well compared to other O-Power programs. If you look at the legacy group, it's been the #1 performer in the whole O-Power portfolio since the beginning. So. In terms of upcoming product launches, just go over 4 here that we're looking at. I know you had asked about the mobile app. We have a mobile app that will be launched here in January. And another thing is rates modeling, where they can go to the web and put in their interval data into a rates modeling program that will say if I went to the TOU residential program, would I save money, and it doesn't make sense to switch. And as we have more rate options, we can expand that on the website. Usage alerts, if people want a program, you know, when my bill reaches a certain amount, send me an email. That'll be something we'll have. And we're also looking to launch a small business program, so they can go online and see their interval data and get tips on how to save energy.
Okay.
Guess I didn't click that. So as far as the mobile launch is the one I believe you really were interested in, that's January, that should say 24, or it's 2014, yes it does, okay. Key functionality of the program, you can do bill pay. I know you had asked about that last time. There'll be outage alerts, and they'll be able to get information from their home energy report on their mobile phone. And that's the update. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
So the legacy group and the expansion group, and then I know you talked about the upcoming launch of the mobile applications. How much longer are these two going to last, the legacy and the expansion?
They're currently approved to the end of this fiscal year. We do have, and I should mention, we do have a annual energy target with the CEC. This year it's about, I think it's 11,800 megawatt hours. The O-Power provides about 50% of that target. I'd like to continue it because we'd have to replace it with something that would, I'm sure, cost us more.
So at this time, there's no plan to continue, but we will be launching the
Well,
mobile
what we
apps.
do is we put together a public benefit program portfolio and budgets. It's a 2-year program. We will be putting that together in the next, say, 3 to 4 months and bringing it, I guess, to you guys and to the city council to review and approve. And right now, I believe we'll continue O-Power as part of that.
So right now, these the energy. The home energy reports are only being sent to, did you say 70,000 residential?
50,000.
50,000, okay. And do we have a plan to send these out to everyone?
Actually, our plan really would be to, once the app gets promoted, to drive people to the app and the web, because the biggest cost is the paper to mail it. Although people like the paper report, we could expand it and mail it to all people, and it might be a good time to look at that because the program has been in place and we pretty much know what the energy savings are. They've been a steady 3%, or the legacy group's a little lower, so it's probably more like 2.8%, and we could report to the CEC based on that and expand the program to all 65 or 70,000, and that would mean doing away with the control group, which can be done.
I see. Thanks.
Can you talk further about the usage alerts? That sounds like a nice service for our customers to be able to have and realize, I suppose, some of the benefits of our new technology. So what you said was that it would alert customers to high usage if it's above their average. So is that just against historical averages, or can customers establish a threshold, and does it provide them with a heads up at some point during the month if their trajectory is going to put them beyond what they want to spend? Does that make sense?
Yes, I believe it's going to do both. People can go in, say this is what, tell me when my bill looks like it's going to hit this amount, and they'll get an email or some text message saying.
Right. And it'll be, and what you're saying then is that it'll be in time for them to adjust their usage, right? So you don't want them to hit their.
No, we're not going to. It'll be a projection saying if you continue using what you're using,
right,
your bill is going to exceed your budget that you set.
Understood. Okay.
Is it going to be able to pull from your meter and sort of get your live usage and sort of give you what you're using at the time?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, our meters are Zigbee. We do have the in-home display pilot that can give you real-time meter information for electric. But it's mixing the technology right now would be difficult. Although the people who do the in-home display say all those technology questions are easily answered. It just ask them how and they'll figure out a way. So.
Anything else? No? Well, thank you, Mr. Keene. Okay, then let's go to the next item.
For oral communications,
We have one speaker, Mr. Herbert Milano. 5 minutes.
Commission President Yao, Commissioners, my name is Herbert Milano. I got a long list here that I hope you can bear with me and maybe take some notes on items that may be of interest to you. It's been 3 months since the end of the fiscal year. I never understood why it takes so incredibly long for an organization that is a quasi-entrepreneurial organization to provide financial reports. Most organizations provide monthly financial reports. I would love to see this commission expect and require monthly financial reports coming out. The last financial reports came out in February of this year. You know, we were worrying to the election. The information was really not provided. We really couldn't put it into a lot of the debates. I believe that every organization, especially public organizations, should provide a definitive audited financial reports 3 months after the end of the year. I think that we should expect it, and I'm hoping that you can demand that information by next month, not we'll have to wait until December or January of the following year. I am suggesting that you expect some type of strategic plan concept to be brought to you every single month on items that are really significant. We are presented here with all kinds of plans and objectives, you know, from the year before and the year before, but we never really get a chance to come back and say, well, how do you do on those projections? We really don't. And that's something that I would love to see change with the way we provide oversight to the GWP. With regard to the way costs are presented, I've been making this suggestion that is very common, especially for in business intelligence reports, and most people who've done, you know, MBAs and so forth understand it. Provide us consistent information relative to to a very standardized cost. For example, we're talking about cost per water. What would be the cost per acre foot in terms of the production of it, the distribution of it, the labor cost and perks and benefits of it, so that we can compare. So depending on the usage, we just have an independent, you know, single number. The same thing with regard to kilowatt hour usage. You know, what is our cost for producing, you know, 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity? Or megawatt hours, sorry, it's too small a number. And so 1,000 megawatts. What's the cost of production? What's the cost of delivery, right? And so that it's consistent on a month-to-month basis, and basically so we can get a sense of really what it's costing us, and you guys will get a better of a view of the trend lines of how those costs are moving across the timeline. Back in 2007, when I was suggesting smart meters, I was really talking about the in-home metering system that's been in place in Canada for well over a decade, and that saves customers about 20% of the electricity. By having those in-home devices, they found that it saves them easily 20% because they're monitoring themselves and cutting electricity accordingly. That was the whole idea, not this super expensive, you know, $60 million system that we got ourselves into. Nonetheless, I would love to see how many people are getting those on a month-to-month basis. We are continually being told about the ability to be able to monitor electricity and getting messages and so forth. Believe me, I've been pushing hard and I make calls trying to figure out any monitoring that I can get, especially with regard to water usage. Because I don't want a pipe to be broken and, you know, and the water to be wasted and the bill going sky high, or the leakage that generally tends to occur that we can monitor at 3 o'clock in the morning usage, for example. So I'd love to see how many customers are getting these devices, how many customers are receiving the text messaging with regard to their usage, you know, and on a month to see if we're really moving forward. I'd love to see how many customers are paying online exclusively. Part of the reason why customers are still asking for papers because the way it is being offered, to say, well, you have a choice, paper or electronic. And if you offer paper first, people are going to say, yeah, I'll continue doing it the way you always did it, but give me the electronic option too. So I think that you need to know how many are asking for that exclusively. I'd love to know how many low-income residents in poor areas are getting that 48-hour notice of impending shutoff. I would like to know how many small businesses are unable to pay. I think that should be a monthly report. We should know how these rate increases are impacting the public, how they're impacting the small businesses, so that we can see a trend line month to month as the rates continue to go, increasingly higher and higher. We want to know how many businesses and homeowners are struggling by zip code or by business classification. And then a review of prior year promises and objectives to see how we're doing against them. Anyway, that's my suggestion for monthly reports. I hope you can consider them and put them into practice. Thanks.
Any comments? I do recall that when Mr. Bragg took over the water utility, that he presented some cost per acre foot in terms of labor, capital expenditure, so that was eye-opening, because I remember making those comments that the public would be interested in continuing that trend where you display costs per gallon potentially, so that we can compare those metrics, as Mr. Herbert Milano was suggesting. So if you can continue to do that, and maybe suggest to Mr. Zone that that's something that this commission, I think, we want to continue seeing. Okay, so no other comments? Let's move on to the agenda forecast.
5, agenda forecast.
For the agenda forecasts for the upcoming meeting in November, we're looking at bringing back the feed-in tariff analysis review that you requested. The utility modernization update will be provided on the 4th as well. Tomorrow, we're going to have the DOE visiting with us and giving them an update on the program, so we will have a better story to tell in November once we complete that visit from Department of Energy. NERC WEC compliance program update to keep you apprised of what changes are happening in the reliability world. The RKS survey that you requested last month, we will provide that. An energy risk management update, and also legislative update.
So it sounds like the customer service RKS update will capture some of the customer services issues that Ms. Tammy Valier that presented last time, right, on shut-off or collections.
That's correct. This also compares how we're performing compared to other utilities as part of this survey.
Anything else on the agenda that we want to suggest or?
You're talking about for November?
November?
Nothing more for November.
Because we're not going to have a December meeting, and potentially January is iffy because it's right after the New Year's week. So hopefully we'll keep the January, but then may cover a lot in November, so that since we don't have a December meeting, is that enough to cover enough agenda items that we have?
So I do have a question regarding, I know we had a conversation about the strategic plan, and I guess the need for a refresh at some point. What I don't recall is the time frame for seeing any type of an updated strategic plan.
Yeah, we have not committed to a date, but that's something that we can bring back to you in the near future. We, the management, have been discussing our strategy as we're moving forward. So we just haven't had a presentation material for you. So I will bring that up to Mr. Stern.
Is there anything specific that we want to see in the strategic plan that we can recommend when they start thinking about putting one together?
So I guess from my perspective, what would be helpful to see as part of a strategic plan is to set out goals. I think one of the things that is important, I think, to me, and hopefully to our customers, is that when we measure our performance, that we measure our performance not just relative to our own previous performance, but relative to benchmarks. right, so that we know that there's something relevant, I think, that we're tracking against. So I'd love to be able to see benchmarks highlighted in the strategic plan. And then coming out of that, I guess, maybe this is somewhat in the spirit of what Mr. Milano was talking about, but is to be able to have some set of metrics or measures that perhaps you use to do your job. How do you track things on a regular basis? Some of that might be some pieces of what we have seen. Things like the SAIDI and SAFI, the duration and frequency of outages. It could be the progress toward RPS 33, customer satisfaction. Those types of targets, and things like budget and how we're doing from a financial perspective. I know that recently there was probably what was an unexpected cost when we provided bonuses to managers for covering at Grayson, I suppose it was, right? So, long way of saying, what I'd love to be able to see from the strategic plan are a set of metrics, sort of a bench, maybe it's a sort of a dashboard of sorts. It says, here are the 5 or so key metrics that we're using to track our performance over time, and to have a regular update on that. I'd leave it to staff discretion. Does regular mean monthly? Does regular mean quarterly? Does it mean annually? I'd lean for something more frequent than annual, but those would be some of the things that I would love to see come through the result of a strategic plan refresh.
Thank you for that, because I do like to see it more frequent than annually, and I like to echo that the metric setting, as I mentioned, Mr. Bragg provided an outstanding job in the previous presentation on comparing ourselves, let's say, labor per kilowatt hours or labor per acre foot, the water side. So that was very clear to indicate how we compare with other utilities. So if we can continue to do that, compare ourselves to, let's say, cost per distribution mile on the electric side and capital cost per acre foot. So those type of comparisons, I think, would be very helpful for the public as well as this commission to see how we're doing in terms of measuring ourselves against other benchmarks.
We'll certainly look at that.
If I may, before we get into an extremely lengthy discussion about it, because this isn't specifically on the agenda, I'd like to limit our discussion for today to items that will be placed on the agenda. But I know that Mr. Abweg is noting comments, and we'll bring this forth. If you have something, sort of more limited to say about what you'd like to see on the agenda on this item, then let's try and keep it to that.
I don't want to make any comments about the strategic plan. Then I'll share those with staff offline. That's fine.
But so I guess like at next meeting we can set a timeline on potentially when we can see the first draft or some kind of discussion on a strategic plan. Is that possible by next month? You think Mr. Zone will have some kind of a framework in place?
I will run that, Mr. Stern, and see if we can make any commitment by next month.
So maybe let's put that on the agenda. If the staff's not ready, then we can postpone it, but at least have formally on the agenda item so that we can at least have some preliminary discussion on it, and then we can talk about some recommendations further.
Absolutely. So for November, is that what
Yes,
you're
please.
planning? Okay.
Yeah, and then maybe being true to the format here and talking about what belongs on the agenda or what we'd like to see on the agenda. What would be helpful is to then map out. So let's think about. I'd like to see some of the preliminary work before we get to a final product. I suppose I'm still talking about the strategic plan in some form, but that is to say, I'd love to be able to see here are the types of things that we're baking into the strategic plan. Here's a draft of a dashboard that staff is considering. So if those types of things would be appropriate, then I'd love to be able to bake those into the upcoming meetings so that we don't get to a point where we're just looking at a final product.
Yeah.
So
is that fair?
If I can make a suggestion, why don't we actually just agendize a strategic plan outlook?
Yes.
Which gives us the ability to have a conversation about what we're looking for and what you anticipate being in the strategic plan. Because frankly, we can make all kinds of suggestions that may already be there. So it'd be helpful for you to sort of cover what's going to be in the plan, and then we can expand and elaborate.
Okay, we'll put that on the agenda.
So there used to be one that we were reviewing regularly. So I understand, we might want to steer away from that or change it quite a bit, but it'd be helpful if you bring it with you next time we discuss it.
Okay.
So the only new item from the current November agenda items is the strategic plan outlook. So that's the only item to add for November. Besides that, is there anything else?
I told you already, I will not be able to be here that month, right?
Anyone else besides the three of us? And hopefully Jemian will be here too, but we need a quorum. At least the Mr. Carmichael, Mr. Hare, and I will be here, right? No other-
That's correct.
All right, if nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.